She swore that no man would ever touch her again, neither with his hands nor with truth. But that look from the millionaire seemed to tear out memories she had never told anyone. If you like stories of love and romance, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you are listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. If this story has piqued your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Maribel Spencer arrived at Hillcrest Hacienda with the firm stride of someone who had already lost the right to be fragile. At 23, she had been fleeing for months, from a scandal that was never fully revealed, from a love that almost destroyed her, and from a promise she made to herself never again to fall in love with someone who could dominate her. She had worked as a waitress, caregiver, receptionist, but nothing was permanent. Nothing lasted. In her luggage, she carried a hidden necklace with an initial that no longer belonged to her, an old handwritten note, and a secret that forced her to live in constant motion. The opportunity as a live-in employee at the old stone hacienda in St. Michael's Spring seemed perfect. Isolation, good salary, and absolute discretion. All she needed was to disappear. No one spoke much about the owner. They only said he was strange, solitary, and silent, but Maribel had dealt with worse men, and if there were any shadows in that house, she would know how to handle them. The road to the hacienda wound through fields of blue agave that stretched like a thorny sea under Emerald County's relentless sky. The property, famous for its premium tequila, had been the pride of the Hillcrest family for generations. Now, however, rumors said its current owner had turned it into his own purgatory. "First time in St. Michael's, miss?" asked the taxi driver, adjusting his rearview mirror to get a better look at her. "Yes," Maribel lied, though something in the air felt strangely familiar. An elusive memory like the scent of a forgotten dream upon waking. Hillcrest Hacienda. Not many people go there these days, the man continued, with that tone that anticipates a story he's dying to tell. "Ever since Mrs. Isabel, you know." Maribel didn't know, but she nodded anyway. She had been taught that sometimes it's better to feign knowledge than to reveal ignorance. "Will you be working for Mr. Julian?" "Yes, as a housekeeper." The taxi driver let out a low whistle. "Be careful, miss. They say the master hasn't been the same for 7 years. Some believe the hacienda is, you know, haunted," Maribel completed with a skeptical smile. "Spirits are no laughing matter in these lands. Miss." When the taxi finally stopped in front of an imposing wrought-iron gate, Maribel felt an inexplicable chill. The gates opened automatically, as if they were waiting for her, revealing a jacaranda-lined path leading to the main house, a majestic pink stone structure, with carved balconies and an air of faded grandeur. Mrs. Carmen, the outgoing housekeeper, greeted her with the resigned expression of one handing over the keys to a prison she was finally abandoning. "You're just in time," the older woman said, her dark eyes studying Maribel, as if searching for something specific in her face. "Mr. Hillcrest is very strict with schedules." "Is he here now?" "He usually doesn't appear until dusk. He spends most of the day in his study or the conservatory. I'll show you your duties and your room." As they toured the hacienda, Maribel observed every detail. The high ceilings with carved wooden beams, the polished terracotta floors, the thick walls that kept the interior cool despite the outside heat. Everything exquisite, everything ancient, everything imbued with a sadness that seemed to have clung to the very stones. "This house is over 200 years old," Mrs. Carmen explained. "The Hillcrest family has been here for 7 generations. Mr. Julian is the last." "He has no family?" The woman visibly tensed. "He had a wife, Mrs. Isabel." "What happened to her?" Mrs. Carmen stopped in front of a large portrait in the main hall. In it, a beautiful woman with black hair and intense eyes looked at the painter with an enigmatic smile. There was something in that gaze that unsettled Maribel. Something familiar. She disappeared 7 years ago. She was swimming in the cenote behind the property. They only found her white dress floating among the water lilies. They never found her. They never found her. Maribel felt a knot in her throat. And Mr. Hillcrest? He changed after that. Before, he was different. Sociable, generous, full of life. Now, the woman cut herself off as if remembering who she was talking to. Now he prefers solitude. Upon reaching a room on the 2nd floor, Mrs. Carmen opened a carved wooden door. "This will be your room." It's near the library where the master spends many nights. Sometimes he needs things at odd hours. The room was more luxurious than Maribel expected. A large four-poster bed, an antique mahogany wardrobe, a dressing table with a mirror, and a balcony overlooking the agave fields. But what caught her eye was a small object on the dresser, a silver butterfly brooch. "That shouldn't be there," Mrs. Carmen murmured, quickly picking it up and putting it in her pocket. It must belong to a previous employee. There was something in her expression that suggested otherwise, but Maribel didn't press. She would have time to investigate later. "How many people work here?" she asked, placing her suitcase on the bed. "During the day, the agave workers and the distillery staff, but in the main house only you and Solana, the cook. And Mr. Ansel, the gardener, though he rarely comes inside. Mr. Hillcrest prefers to keep his distance from people." As Mrs. Carmen continued explaining the routines and duties, Maribel approached the balcony. From there she could see the vast agave fields, the purple mountains in the distance, and closer, a crystal-clear cenote surrounded by lush vegetation. She felt a sudden vertigo, as if she had contemplated that same landscape before. "The cenote is forbidden," Mrs. Carmen said, noticing her gaze. "Mr. Hillcrest doesn't allow anyone near it." That night, after Mrs. Carmen left with a promise to return in a week to see how she was settling in, Maribel finally met her employer. She was finishing tidying the library when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and saw him. Tall, aristocratic in bearing, eyes like obsidian, and a face that could have been handsome if not for the hardness that inhabited it. Julian Hillcrest, at 39, seemed to carry the weight of several lifetimes. He didn't greet her. He simply watched her with an intensity that was almost physical. "Mr. Hillcrest," Maribel broke the silence. "I'm Maribel Spencer, the new housekeeper." He continued to observe her, as if searching for something in her face, in her posture, in the way she held his gaze without flinching. Did Mrs. Carmen explain the house rules? His voice was deep with a timbre that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Yes, sir. There are rooms in this house that remain locked. You must respect that." "Of course. The cenote is forbidden." "I understand." Julian took a step towards her, so close that Maribel could smell his scent, agave, leather, and something deeper, more personal. For a fleeting instant, a flicker of recognition crossed the man's eyes, quickly replaced by calculated coolness. "Do we know each other?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maribel felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't think so, sir." He continued to look at her, as if he could extract the truth directly from her pupils. Finally, he nodded once. "I hope your stay here is adequate." Without adding more, he turned and headed for a side door Maribel hadn't noticed before. Only when she heard the click of the lock did she allow herself to release the breath she had been holding. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Maribel couldn't sleep. There was something about that hacienda, about that man, that awakened unsettling echoes in her memory. As if in some forgotten corner of her mind, she already knew this place. And then she heard it, the soft, melancholic notes of a piano. A melody so sad it seemed to have the power to draw tears even from stone. She got up and opened her bedroom door, letting the music guide her. In the main hall, under the silver moonlight filtering through the windows, Julian Hillcrest played the piano with his eyes closed. His fingers caressed the keys as if they were the last thing anchoring him to this world. And on the piano, covered by a white veil that seemed to move with the melody, was Isabel's portrait. The days at Hillcrest Hacienda followed an almost ceremonial rhythm. Maribel quickly learned the routines, waking at dawn, preparing breakfast that Julian rarely tasted, cleaning rooms no one used, arranging fresh flowers in vases no one admired. It was like keeping alive a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. Solana, the cook, a robust woman in her 60s with grey braids and wise hands, was her only regular company. "Mr. Julian wasn't always like this," Solana commented one morning while kneading dough for tortillas. Before the tragedy, this house was brimming with life. Parties, laughter, music. Mrs. Isabel transformed this place when she arrived. "What was she like?" Maribel asked, feeling a curiosity that went beyond simple gossip. "Beautiful like few others, intelligent, with a laugh that could light up the entire hacienda." Solana lowered her voice. Though they were alone in the kitchen, But there was something in her eyes, something restless, as if she was always searching for something she couldn't find. How did she and Mr. Julian meet? It was almost like a fairy tale. She appeared one day lost, looking for work. She was a teacher in the city, but she wanted to get away from something. She never said what. Solana formed a perfect tortilla, with movements practiced for decades. Mr. Julian was captivated from the first moment. They married barely 3 months later. And were they happy? Solana hesitated, her hands stopping momentarily. In their own way, he adored her. He gave her everything she asked for, but there are loves that consume, child. Like fire, beautiful to behold but dangerous to touch. That same day, while cleaning Julian's study, always under the strict condition of not touching any papers, Maribel found something curious, a photograph that had fallen behind a bookcase. In it, a young woman smiled at the camera, with the hacienda's cenote as a backdrop. It wasn't Isabel, she was sure of that. This woman had shorter hair, softer features, but something in her smile was disturbingly familiar. Turning the photograph over, she saw an inscription. Marianne, always in my memory. 2013. She put the photograph in her apron pocket, intending to ask Solana about it later. However, when she turned around, Julian was at the study door watching her. Mr. Hillcrest, she said, startled. I didn't hear you come in. This house holds many secrets, he replied, approaching slowly. Some should remain hidden. His gaze dropped to her apron pocket, where the photograph created a barely perceptible bulge. Maribel felt her heart quicken. I was just cleaning, sir. There's dirt that can't be cleaned, Maribel. There are stains that become part of you. His eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her instinctively step back. Sometimes I wonder why you really came to this house. For work, she replied, keeping her voice firm despite her nervousness. I needed a fresh start. We all need that at some point. Julian walked over to the window overlooking the agave fields. What are you running from, Maribel Spencer? The question, so direct, left her momentarily speechless. I'm not running. You lie, he said with no accusation in his voice, just a quiet certainty. I see it in your eyes. I recognize that look because I've seen it before. In Isabel. In Marianne. The name made Maribel unconsciously clench the photograph in her pocket. Who is Marianne? Julian turned to look at her, and for a moment, his mask of coldness cracked, revealing a pain so raw it was difficult to behold. Someone who also thought she could start anew. He approached her, so close she could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. But there are places, Maribel, where time folds in on itself, where the past never truly finishes passing. That night, the piano melody played later than usual. Maribel found herself following it again, but this time, upon reaching the main hall, the piano was empty. The music, however, continued to play, as if invisible fingers caressed the keys. Maribel felt the air thicken, the temperature drop. And then a whisper behind her. You shouldn't be here. She turned sharply, expecting to find Julian, but instead saw an old woman she had never seen before. Her wrinkled face seemed to have seen too many winters, and her eyes, though clouded by cataracts, conveyed a penetrating lucidity. The music woke me, Maribel explained. The music always plays at this hour, the old woman said. It's its way of remembering. Whose way of remembering what? The house's of remembering what it saw. Maribel looked at the piano, now silent. Who are you? I haven't seen you before. I am Mrs. Remedios. I come when I'm needed. I leave when my presence hurts. The old woman took her arm with surprising strength. You shouldn't be here, child. It's not safe. Why? Because you've been here before. Before Maribel could ask more, the old woman moved away, disappearing into the hacienda's dark corridors. Confused and disturbed, Maribel returned to her room only to find the door open. She was sure she had closed it before leaving. Upon entering, everything seemed to be in its place except for one detail. On her pillow was a silver butterfly brooch. The same one Mrs. Carman had put in her pocket on the first day. When she picked up the brooch, she noticed something engraved on the back. The initials M.L. Maribel Spencer. Her initials, but she had never owned such a brooch. The next morning, she decided to explore the hacienda grounds, specifically the area near the forbidden cenote. The day was clear and warm, typical of Emerald County in spring. In the distance, The agave workers moved among the thorny plants, harvesting the ripe piñas for the distillery. The path to the cenote was deliberately neglected, as if to discourage visits. Wild vegetation, loose stones, and fallen branches obstructed the trail. Still, Maribel pressed on, guided by a curiosity she couldn't explain. The cenote was more beautiful than she had imagined, a perfect circle of turquoise water, surrounded by limestone and lush vegetation. It looked like an eye gazing at the sky, or perhaps a portal to another world. Sunbeams created hypnotic glints on the crystal surface. She knelt at the edge, looking at her reflection in the water. For a moment, her image seemed to ripple strangely, transforming into another face. A face similar to hers, but not exactly the same. "You look so much like her," Julian's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him approach. He was a few feet away, observing her with an unreadable expression. "I told you this place was forbidden," he continued, but without anger in his voice. Only a deep sadness. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to see what Isabel saw before she disappeared." Maribel stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "I didn't mean to—" "What do you see when you look at the water, Maribel?" Julian interrupted her, approaching until he stood beside her, both looking at the cenote. "Do you see only your reflection? Or do you see something more?" For some reason, Maribel couldn't lie. "I see someone else. Someone who looks like me but isn't me." Julian nodded as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. Cenotes were sacred to the Mayans. They believed they were entrances to the underworld, places where time works differently, where souls can get trapped. He extended a hand towards her without quite touching her. "There's something about you, Maribel. Something that feels familiar." "Mr. Hillcrest." "Julian," he corrected. "When we're alone, call me Julian." A charged silence settled between them. Maribel could feel something growing in that space, something both dangerous and magnetic. "We should go back," she finally said. "Solana will be waiting to serve lunch." As they walked back to the hacienda, Maribel noticed that Julian maintained a precise distance between them, as if there was an invisible line he refused to cross. However, his eyes kept searching for her, studying her as if trying to solve an enigma written on her skin. During lunch, which for the first time Julian shared with her in the main dining room instead of eating alone in his study, he asked her about her life, seemingly casual questions, but Maribel sensed a hidden purpose in them. "Where did you grow up?" "In Crimson Canyon," she replied. A lie, but she had repeated it so many times it almost felt like truth. "Family?" "My parents passed away when I was a child. I was raised by my grandmother. And before coming here," Maribel hesitated. "I worked in Capital City as a personal assistant." "For whom?" "An entrepreneur." "I'd rather not talk about it." Julian nodded as if her reticence was exactly what he expected. "We all have secrets we prefer to keep, Maribel. But secrets are like seeds. Buried, they grow into something we can no longer control." After lunch, Maribel headed to Isabel's room. She knew it was locked, but felt an inexplicable need to see inside. To her surprise, when she turned the doorknob, the door opened without resistance. The room seemed frozen in time, a white dress spread over the bed, open perfume bottles on the dressing table, a half-read book on the nightstand, as if Isabel had just stepped out for a moment and would return at any instant. Approaching the dressing table, Maribel saw something that made her gasp, an open jewelry box, and inside a brooch identical to the one she had found on her pillow. Only this one was engraved with the initials I.H., Isabel Hillcrest. There was also a diary. She opened it with trembling hands. The last entry, dated the day of Isabel's disappearance, consisted of a single line. "She has returned, and this time I am ready to meet her." Maribel slammed the diary shut upon hearing footsteps approaching in the hallway. She quickly left the room, closing the door behind her. She leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. Just as Julian turned the corner. Julian stopped when he saw her, his dark eyes assessing the situation with unsettling precision. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice calm despite the evident tension in his posture. Maribel quickly improvised. "I was cleaning the halls and stopped to rest for a moment, in front of Isabel's room." It wasn't a question. His eyes moved to the door, as if checking if it had been disturbed. Maribel held her breath, fearing he would notice it was unlocked. "This hallway is always cold," Julian commented, slowly approaching. Isabel used to say it was because it held the size of everyone who had ever loved in this house. He stopped in front of her, so close that Maribel could distinguish the small wrinkles around his eyes, scars of smiles that no longer existed. "Do you believe in ghosts, Maribel?" The question, so unexpected, disconcerted her. "No, I don't know. I didn't either, until I started living with them." He extended his hand, and for a moment, Maribel thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he plucked something from her hair, a small white petal she hadn't noticed. Magnolia blossoms, Isabel's favorites. It's curious how they appear in the most unexpected places. Without adding more, he continued down the hallway. Maribel waited until he disappeared before releasing the breath she had been holding. Looking down at the floor, she noticed a trail of white petals she hadn't seen before, leading from Isabel's room to her own. That night, the dreams began. She saw herself running through the hacienda's corridors, pursued by a faceless shadow. The white dress she wore was not hers, too long, too elegant. Upon reaching the cenote, she saw her reflection in the water. It was her, but it wasn't her. The face looking back had her features, but there was something different, something older in those eyes. "Marianne," a voice whispered behind her. She turned and saw Julian, but younger, without the weight of pain in his gaze. "I'm not Marianne," she said in the dream. "And you're not Isabel either," he replied, approaching. "But you could be both." She woke with a start, her clothes clinging to her body from cold sweat. The room was in shadow, lit only by moonlight filtering through the curtains. And then she noticed it. The wardrobe, which had been closed when she went to sleep, now had its doors open. Inside, hanging like a promise or a threat, was a white dress. The next morning, she decided to confront Solana. She found her in the kitchen, preparing hot chocolate and sweet bread for breakfast. "I need to ask you something," Maribel said, closing the kitchen door to ensure their privacy. Solana looked at her cautiously. "If it's about the hacienda, there are things it's better not to know. Who was Marianne Larson?" The cook almost dropped the mug she was holding. Her face, normally serene, visibly paled. "Where did you hear that name?" "I found it in a photograph, and Mr. Hillcrest mentioned her." Solana hastily crossed herself. "Marianne worked here 10 years ago, before Mrs. Isabel. What happened to her?" "She disappeared." Solana lowered her voice to a whisper. Just like Mrs. Isabel in the same cenote, Maribel felt a chill run down her spine. "And did she look like me?" The look Solana gave her was answer enough. "When I saw you the first day, I thought I was seeing a ghost. You have her same smile, her same eyes." She approached and took Maribel's hands in hers. "Child, you must leave this hacienda before history repeats itself." "What history?" "The one about the women who disappear." Solana looked nervously towards the door. "There's something about Mr. Julian, something that attracts a certain type of woman. Women with secrets, women fleeing. And there's something about this hacienda that won't let them go. Do you think Julian had something to do with the disappearances? Not what you're thinking. Mr. Julian loved those women, each in his own way. Too much, perhaps." Solana released her hands and returned to her tasks. "But there are loves that devour, child. There are passions that consume until nothing is left." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Ansell, the gardener. An elderly man with calloused hands and a face weathered by decades under the Emerald County sun. "Good morning, Solana," he greeted, then fixed his gaze on Maribel. His eyes widened in surprise. "Well, what they say is true. The resemblance is astonishing." "Mr. Ansell," Solana reprimanded him with a look, "what brings you to the kitchen so early?" "I've come to announce that the magnolias have bloomed. Mr. Julian will want to know." Maribel seized the opportunity. "I'll tell him. I have to take him his breakfast anyway." When Anselmo had left, Maribel turned back to Solana. "One last question. What really happened to Marianne?" The cook sighed deeply. "No one knows for sure. She and Mr. Julian had an intense relationship. One day they argued terribly. She ran out towards the cenote. He followed her. When he returned, he was alone, drenched, with a lost look. He said she had gone, that he couldn't stop her. And they believed him? They found nothing to suggest otherwise. But since then, Mr. Julian changed. He became somber, distant, until he met Isabel a year later, and the cycle began again. With those unsettling words echoing in her mind, Maribel headed to Julian's study with the breakfast tray. She found him standing by the window contemplating the agave fields with an immobility that seemed almost supernatural. "Your breakfast, sir," she announced, "and Mr. Ansell asked me to inform you that the magnolias have bloomed." Julian turned slowly. His eyes had that peculiar shine that appeared when he looked at her for too long, as if he were seeing someone else through her. "Thank you, Maribel. Please tell Ansell to cut some for the main hall." "Of course." She was about to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Did you sleep well last night?" The question, seemingly innocent, contained a subtext she couldn't ignore. "I had strange dreams," she admitted. "About what?" "About a woman with my face. And about you, but different." Instead of being surprised, Julian nodded as if her answer confirmed a theory. "Dreams are curious, aren't they? Sometimes they're just fantasies. Other times they're memories we didn't know we had." He walked over to an antique cabinet and pulled out a carved wooden box. From it he took out a small shiny object, a necklace with a crescent moon pendant. "This belonged to Marianne," he said, holding the necklace for Maribel to see. Then to Isabel. "Now I want you to have it." Maribel instinctively recoiled. "I can't accept it." "It's not a gift, Maribel. It's a restitution. Something that already belonged to you." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand for now." He placed the necklace on the breakfast tray. "Just wear it, and you'll see how the dreams become clearer." That afternoon, while cleaning the library, Maribel found a displaced book on one of the shelves. Mayan Mythology and the Cult of Sacred Cenotes. Opening it, she discovered underlined pages and annotations in the margins, in the elegant handwriting she now recognized as Julian's. One section in particular caught her attention. The Mayans believed that certain cenotes served as portals where worlds touched. In these sacred places, time could fold in on itself, allowing souls separated by decades or even centuries to meet. The proper ritual could even allow a soul to return in a new body, retaining fragments of its past memories. Below it, a note written by Julian. "The cycle repeats. She always returns but never complete. Fragments of 3 women 3 times. How to break the pattern." Maribel slammed the book shut when she heard approaching footsteps. It was Mr. Ansell, with a freshly cut bouquet of magnolias. "For the main hall," he explained. "Though these flowers have always given me a bad feeling. They bloom out of season, especially near the cenote." "Mr. Ansell," Maribel seized the moment. "You've worked here a long time, haven't you?" "All my life, child. And my father before me. Then you knew Marianne. And Isabel." The old man looked at her warily. "Yes, both of them." "And did you notice any resemblance between them?" "And me?" Ansell placed the flowers in a vase before answering. "There are things in this hacienda that are best left undisturbed, miss. Ancient secrets. The cenote isn't just water and stone, you know. The ancients said it has memory." "Memory of what?" "Of everything it has seen. Of everyone who has been reflected in it." The gardener approached, lowering his voice. "The first time I saw Miss Marianne, I thought she was the ghost of another woman. One who had worked here in the 80s when I was young. Dolores was her name. She also disappeared in the cenote." Maribel felt the ground move beneath her feet. "Are you saying there have been more? Before Marianne?" "There are always signs, you know. The magnolias blooming out of season. The piano playing by itself. And a woman appearing with the same face, different names." Ansell headed towards the door, but before leaving he added, "Be careful with the necklace, miss. The moon has 2 faces, one that shows itself and one that always remains in shadow." That night, after the hacienda plunged into silence, Maribel decided to explore further. With the crescent moon necklace around her neck, she had put it on reluctantly, curious to see if it would affect her dreams, she went to the library. She searched for more books on Mayan mythology, on cenotes, on anything that could explain the strange occurrences at the hacienda. In a secluded corner behind a bookshelf that seemed not to have been touched in decades, she found an old trunk. It was closed with a padlock, but to her surprise, the key hung from a chain attached to the handle, as if someone had wanted to ensure that whoever found the trunk could open it. Inside, she discovered a treasure trove of ancient documents, yellowed letters, faded photographs, crumbling diaries, and something else, a manuscript titled The Ritual of Return. The text was written in a mix of Old Spanish and symbols Maribel didn't recognize, but which she assumed were Mayan. However, some sections were legible. The cenote is the door between worlds. Whoever enters its waters with the lunar amulet and an open heart can cross the veil of time. But beware, the water has memory, and what is broken in one time can remain broken in another. Further on, she found an underlined passage. To break the cycle, the lovers must confront the truth that lies at the bottom of the cenote. Guilt and forgiveness must flow like water freely. Only then can the circle be broken, and separated souls find peace together. At the end of the manuscript, a handwritten note in a script she recognized as Julian's. I have tried 3 times. With Dolores, with Marianne, with Isabel. Each time they arrive with fewer memories, with less of her within them. Each time the ending is the same. Is it possible that the ritual is misinterpreted? What if what I seek is not to reunite our souls, but to free them? Maribel slammed the manuscript shut, her mind processing this new information. Was Julian genuinely trying to solve a cosmic mystery? Or was it all an elaborate fantasy, created by a man unable to accept his losses? Returning to her room, she found something unexpected on her bed. A white dress, old but perfectly preserved. She recognized it instantly as the dress Isabel wore in her portrait. The same one that, according to the stories, had been found floating in the cenote. Next to the dress was a note written in Julian's elegant handwriting. Tomorrow is a full moon. The perfect time to look into the water and see the truth. The next morning, Maribel went to the kitchen earlier than usual, hoping to find Solana alone. She needed a different perspective, someone who could confirm she wasn't losing her mind. Have you ever seen the manuscript about the ritual of return? She asked directly after making sure they were alone. Solana dropped the ladle she was stirring in a pot of atole. Where did you find that? In the library. There in a trunk. The cook hastily crossed herself. That document should be locked away. It's dangerous, so you know what it's about? Only what I've heard over the years. Solana lowered her voice. They say the first Hillcrest who built this hacienda, back in the 18th century, fell in love with a Mayan priestess, a forbidden love in that era. When they tried to separate them, they performed a ritual in the cenote, swearing their souls would be together for eternity. And what happened? Legend says something went wrong. Instead of uniting their souls, the ritual created a loop. Every so often, the priestess's soul returns in a new body, drawn by the cenote and by the soul of her lover, which has remained in the Hillcrest family through the generations. That's what Julian believes is happening with me. That I'm some kind of reincarnation. Solana looked at her gravely. And what do you believe? Maribel hesitated. I don't know. It's crazy, but there are things I can't explain. Dreams, memories that aren't mine, constant sensations of déjà vu. Be careful, child. Solana took her hands in hers. If what the legend says is true, the previous ones didn't end well. Julian mentioned a cycle. He said it always ends the same. The water always claims what belongs to it. Solana squeezed her hands tighter. Promise me you won't go to the cenote today. It's a full moon. The veils between worlds thin on nights like these. But Maribel couldn't make that promise. A part of her, a part that seemed to grow stronger, felt an irresistible pull towards the cenote, towards Julian, towards a truth that seemed to await in the depths of those crystal waters. The day passed with a palpable tension in the air. Julian was absent, supposedly at the distillery supervising production, but Maribel felt his presence in every corner of the hacienda, as if the house itself were an extension of him, watching her, waiting. At dusk, while arranging flowers in the main hall, she overheard a conversation between Mr. Ansel and a man she didn't recognize. They spoke in low voices, but in the hacienda's silence their words reached her clearly. This time is different, the stranger was saying. There's something about her that wasn't in the others. A strength, a determination. Or perhaps he's more desperate, Mr. Ansel replied. Each failure has made him more obsessive. Do you think he'll try the ritual again tonight? The signs are there. The magnolias, the full moon, the piano music. We should stop him. For his own good, and for hers. And how do you propose to do that? You saw what happened last time someone intervened. The stranger sighed audibly. I just hope this time is different. That one of them finds the strength to break the cycle. Maribel quietly moved away, her mind processing this new information. Who was that man? And what did he mean by what happened last time? As the sun set, a growing unease seized her. She returned to her room and found the white dress still spread over the bed, like a silent invitation. Next to it, something new appeared. An old perfume bottle with a handwritten label that simply read, "Remember me." Driven by an uncontrollable curiosity, she uncorked the bottle and inhaled. The aroma hit her like a physical wave, jasmine, vanilla, and something deeper, more personal. A scent she had never experienced before and yet found painfully familiar. And then the memories began to flow. They weren't her memories, not exactly. They were fragments, impressions, sensations that belonged to other lives, other versions of her. She saw herself in clothes from another era, walking through the same hacienda corridors. She saw herself laughing in the garden, dancing in the main hall, crying by the cenote. And in every vision, every fragment of memory, Julian was there. Sometimes younger, sometimes older, but always with the same eyes, the same soul looking at her across time. When the memories ceased, Maribel was trembling. Without being fully conscious of her actions, she put on the white dress. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been tailored for her. The crescent moon necklace completed the outfit, shining with its own light against the white fabric. Looking in the mirror, she had the disconcerting sensation that it wasn't just her reflection looking back at her. There were other women looking at her from the other side of the glass. Isabel, Marianne, Dolores, and more. Faces merging with hers, identities superimposed like layers of paint on a canvas. Night had fully fallen when she left her room. The hacienda was plunged into a supernatural silence, as if even the air was holding its breath. The full moon's light filtered through the windows, creating silver patterns on the terracotta floors. As if in a dream, Maribel headed towards the back garden. She knew exactly where she was going, though no one had shown her the way. Her feet carried her by instinct, following a path traveled many times before. The cenote glowed under the moonlight like a magical mirror. The water was so still that it perfectly reflected the starry sky, creating the illusion of a portal to another universe. Around it, the magnolias had fully bloomed, their white petals illuminated by the lunar light. And there, standing by the water, waiting for her, was Julian. He wore a white suit that contrasted dramatically with his tanned skin and dark hair. In his hand, he held what appeared to be an ancient jade amulet. "You came," he said simply, his eyes shining with a mix of hope and fear. "Did I have a choice?" Maribel replied, approaching until she was a few steps from him. "There's always a choice, Maribel. That's the point. In every cycle, every reincarnation, we both have the opportunity to choose a different path." He extended his free hand towards her. "And yet we always end up here. What really happened to the others? To Isabel, to Marianne, to Dolores?" Julian's gaze darkened. "We tried to complete the ritual, to return your complete soul to a single body, to break the cycle of separation." He looked down at the crystal-clear water. "But something always goes wrong. There's always a missing piece, an unspoken truth, an unforgiven trespass. And what makes you think this time will be different?" "Because you are different, Maribel, stronger, more complete." His eyes locked with hers. "And because this time I am willing to reveal the whole truth." "And what is that truth?" Maribel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before Julian could answer, a voice cut through the night air. "Stay away from her, Hillcrest." Both turned towards the voice. A middle-aged man advanced towards them along the path leading to the hacienda. He wore formal, albeit wrinkled, clothes, and his expression was a mixture of determination and exhaustion. In his hand, he held an official identification that gleamed under the moonlight. "Detective Ramsey," Julian said, his voice calm despite the evident interruption. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I bet you didn't." The detective stopped a few feet away, assessing the scene with trained eyes. His gaze fell on Maribel, on the white dress, on the necklace. "I see history repeats itself. Who are you?" Maribel asked, bewildered. "Detective Gabriel Ramsey, from the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Missing Persons." His eyes never left hers, as if trying to communicate something to her without words. "I've been investigating Julian Hillcrest for 7 years. Detective Ramsey has a very interesting theory about me," Julian intervened, his tone almost amused. "He believes I'm responsible for the disappearances of several women. I don't just believe it. I have enough circumstantial evidence to be sure. What I lack are the bodies." The detective took another step towards them. "Isabel Hillcrest, Marianne Larson, Dolores Vance, all disappeared, all linked to you, or last seen near this cenote. All personal decisions, Detective, Julian replied. They chose their path, like Zitlali chose hers 400 years ago. The mention of that name caused a visible reaction in Julian. A spasm of pain crossed his face, quickly controlled. I see you've been investigating thoroughly, he finally said. When I discovered the pattern, I knew I had to dig deeper, Ramsey replied. The Inquisition archives are fascinating, you know, especially those related to Alistair Hillcrest and the Mayan priestess Zitlali. Maribel looked from one man to the other, trying to comprehend. What are you talking about? About the truth Hillcrest will never tell you, the detective said without taking his eyes off Julian. About how it all really began. You have no idea what you're talking about. Julian's voice had lost its usual serenity. You weren't there. Neither were you, Ramsey retorted. Unless you want to confess you're over 4 centuries old. Time works differently for some souls, Detective. Maribel felt her head spinning, saturated with contradictory information. The necklace around her neck seemed to weigh more with each passing second. Miss Spencer, the detective addressed her directly. Do you know why he brought you here? Why he gave you that dress, that necklace? Why he chose you specifically? She came to me, Julian intervened, as she always does. Or did you seek her out as you've sought out all the others? Ramsey pulled a photograph from his pocket and handed it to Maribel. Do you recognize this place? It was a photograph of a coffee shop in Capital City. And in the foreground, sitting at one of the tables, was herself reading a book. In the background, barely visible, Julian's silhouette could be distinguished watching her. This was 6 months ago, Maribel murmured, remembering the day before I came here. 3 months later, you casually find an advertisement to work at Hillcrest Hacienda, Ramsey continued. A job with an excessively generous salary for which you were perfectly qualified. Maribel looked at Julian, who maintained his impassive expression. Were you watching me? I was waiting for you, he corrected. There's a difference. The difference between a stalker and a psychopath, Ramsey interjected. The difference between destiny and coincidence, Julian retorted. He turned to Maribel, ignoring the detective. Yes, I sought you out, because I knew you would return. You always do. Different names, different lives, but the same soul. This is insane, Maribel put her hands to her temples. I need clear answers now. Then allow me to provide them, said a new voice, soft but firm. All three turned towards the source of the voice. From the shadows of the trees emerged a figure Maribel recognized as Mrs. Remedios, the old woman she had seen briefly days ago. Mrs. Remedios, Julian bowed his head slightly, in a gesture that seemed genuinely respectful. I didn't think you would intervene this time. Things have gone too far, the old woman replied, approaching with slow but steady steps. The cycle must be broken, but not in the way you think, Julian. She stopped beside Maribel and looked at her with eyes that, despite her age, shone with an unsettling intensity. You are not Zitlali, child. At least not completely. You are Maribel Spencer, with fragments of an ancient soul within you. Who are you, really? Maribel asked. Someone who has seen this cycle repeat too many times. The old woman extended a wrinkled hand towards the necklace Maribel wore. This amulet was not a symbol of eternal love, as Julian has led you to believe. It was an instrument of control. That's not true, Julian interjected, his voice tense. Isn't it? Mrs. Remedios looked at him sadly. Then tell her the whole truth. Not just the parts that suit you. A tense silence settled between them. The moon shone directly over the cenote, creating a perfect mirror in its still waters. Detective Ramsey remained alert, as if expecting the situation to escalate at any moment. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice deeper, somehow older. In 1648, Alistair Hillcrest, my ancestor, fell in love with Zitlali, a priestess from a nearby Mayan village. It was a forbidden love for 1,000 reasons. He was Spanish, married, a representative of the conquerors. She was indigenous, sacred to her people, guardian of ancestral knowledge. Julian stared fixedly at the cenote water as he spoke. They were discovered. The Inquisition intervened. They accused her of witchcraft, of having bewitched Alistair. They condemned her to death, Mrs. Remedios added, like so many others. But before they could execute her, we fled, Julian continued. We came here to this sacred cenote. Zitlali said she could perform a ritual that would unite our souls forever, allowing us to reunite in other lives. And you agreed, Maribel said, beginning to understand. I agreed. The ritual required a voluntary sacrifice, blood mixed with sacred water, the lunar amulet as a conduit. Julian's eyes locked with Maribel's, but at the last moment I was afraid. I hesitated, and she realized, Mrs. Remedios added. She saw the betrayal in your eyes. It wasn't betrayal. Julian's voice trembled slightly. It was human fear, momentary weakness, but she interpreted it as a fundamental rejection, as if all my love had been a lie. What happened then? Maribel asked, though a part of her already knew, like a dormant memory slowly awakening. Zitlali completed the ritual alone. Without my full participation, the spell twisted. Instead of uniting our souls eternally in love, it condemned us to this cycle, her returning in different bodies, fragmented, incomplete. Me waiting, remembering, trying to mend what was broken. And every time a new version of her appears, Detective Ramsey interjected, you try to complete the ritual. Correct? Julian nodded slowly. Each time I've been closer. With each reincarnation, she remembers a little more, understands a little more. And each time the result is the same, Mrs. Remedios said sternly. The water reclaims her, the cycle continues, and you are left waiting for the next opportunity. Maribel felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying that Isabel, Marianne, Dolores, all of them? Not in the way you think, Julian hastened to clarify. The cenote claimed them, yes, but there was no violence, no crime. Just the water, taking them back into the cycle to try again. That's still homicide in my book, Detective Ramsey said, stepping forward. And I'm not going to let it happen again. You don't understand what's at stake, Julian replied, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. This goes beyond your laws, beyond your limited understanding. I understand enough to know that 3 women are missing, and you are the common denominator. Maribel brought her hands to the necklace, feeling its weight against her skin. She remembered the words of the manuscript. To break the cycle, the lovers must confront the truth that lies at the bottom of the cenote. What truth haven't you told me, Julian? She asked, her clear voice cutting through the tension between the men. Mrs. Remedios said the amulet was an instrument of control, not love. What does that mean? Julian averted his gaze, and for the first time since she had known him, Maribel saw shame in his eyes. The amulet, he began, but stopped, as if the words caused him physical pain. The amulet was an instrument of priestly control, Mrs. Remedios intervened. Zitlali used it to guide souls in sacred rituals, not to unite them in love, but to dominate them, to direct them. Alistair knew, the old woman continued, looking directly at Julian. He knew what it was really for. And at the last moment, he understood that the ritual was not what she had promised him. It was not egalitarian union, but spiritual domination. That's not true, Julian's voice sounded almost desperate now. She loved me. I loved her. Love and control are not the same, Mrs. Remedios replied, though sometimes they are confused. Maribel felt something stirring within her, memories that were not hers struggling to surface. Images of a woman with her face but ancient clothes, performing rituals by the same cenote. The sensation of power flowing through the amulet she now wore. And then the face of a man, Alistair, Julian, the same soul across time, looking at her with a mixture of love and fear. The ritual was not to unite us, she said slowly, the words rising from somewhere deep within her. It was to free us, to break the chains that bound us to this world. Julian looked at her in astonishment. You remember? Not everything, fragments. Maribel took a step towards the cenote, feeling its pull like a physical force. I wanted to take both of us beyond, to a plane where our souls could exist free from earthly limitations. But he was afraid, Mrs. Remedios added. Fear is a powerful force, Maribel, sometimes stronger than love. And since then you've been trying to recreate the ritual, Maribel said, looking at Julian. With each new version of me you find. I've been trying to correct my mistake, he replied, to show your soul that this time I won't be afraid, that I'm ready to take the leap of faith. And how many more lives will you sacrifice in the attempt? Detective Ramsey interjected. How many more women will disappear in this cenote? A heavy silence followed his words. The moonlight seemed to intensify, bathing the scene in a supernatural glow. The cenote water rippled gently, as if something in its depths had stirred. Enough, Maribel finally said. This cycle has lasted too long. She brought her hands to her neck and unclasped the necklace. She held it in front of her, the crescent moon amulet shining with its own light under the full moon. "This is not an instrument of love," she said, "nor of control. It is an anchor, a physical reminder of an incomplete spiritual pact." "What are you going to do?" Julian asked, and for the first time, Maribel saw genuine fear in his eyes. "What should have been done centuries ago?" She looked at Mrs. Remedios. "The cycle can only be broken with truth and forgiveness. Isn't that right?" The old woman nodded slowly. "The truth must be recognized. Forgiveness must be granted. Only then can souls move forward together or separately." Maribel turned to Julian, who looked at her with a mixture of hope and dread. "For centuries you've been trapped in your guilt, trying to mend what you believe you broke. And I, or parts of me, have been trapped in resentment, in anger over your betrayal." "I never meant to betray you," he whispered. "I was just afraid. I know. Now I understand." Maribel extended a hand towards him. "But forgiveness cannot be forced or manipulated. It has to be freely given. What are you saying?" "That it's time for both of us to forgive each other. You for your fear, me for my pride." Maribel looked at the amulet in her hand. "And it's time for this object to stop being a symbol of our bondage." With a fluid movement, Maribel threw the necklace into the cenote. The silver amulet spun in the air, catching the moonlight, before plunging into the crystal waters with barely a ripple. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. A sudden breeze stirred the trees, causing magnolia petals to fall and dance in the night air. The cenote water, previously still as a mirror, began to ripple in concentric circles, as if something in its depths had awakened. "What have you done?" Julian asked, his voice barely audible. "I have done what should have been done centuries ago," Maribel replied, feeling a strange lightness, as if a weight she didn't know she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. "I have freed the symbol of our bondage." The cenote water began to glow with an inner light, as if millions of tiny stars had awakened in its depths. The swirls intensified, forming hypnotic patterns that seemed to tell an ancient story. "The cenote is awakening," Mrs. Remedios murmured. "It is remembering." And then, to everyone's astonished gaze, translucent figures began to form on the water's surface, silhouettes of women who shared the same face, Maribel's face, but with clothes and hairstyles from different eras. "Isabel," Julian whispered, recognizing the first figure that emerged. "Marianne, Dolores." More figures appeared, receding in time. Women in 20th century dresses, 19th century colonial outfits, until reaching a final figure, dressed in Mayan ceremonial attire. "Zitlali," Mrs. Remedios said, bowing her head in respect. Detective Ramsey observed the scene with a mixture of disbelief and awe, his professional skepticism battling against the impossible witnessed by his eyes. Zitlali's figure extended an ethereal hand towards Julian, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to emanate from the depths of the cenote, from the very air, from everywhere and nowhere. "For centuries I have returned, fragmented, incomplete, seeking you and fleeing you at the same time, carrying the weight of a failed ritual and a betrayed love." Julian took a step towards the apparition, unshed tears glistening in his eyes. "I never meant to betray you. I was just afraid. Fear is part of love, as shadow is part of light. I didn't understand that then." Zitlali's figure turned to Maribel. "But you understand it now." Maribel nodded, feeling a strange connection with the apparition. It wasn't that she was Zitlali, but that Zitlali was a part of her, just as all the faces reflected in the water were fragments of a larger story. "The ritual was never about forcing two souls together," Zitlali continued. "That was my mistake, born of desperation and pride. The true purpose was mutual liberation, the acceptance that true love does not bind but frees." "What does this mean for us now?" Julian asked, his voice cracking slightly. "It means choice," Zitlali replied. "For the first time in centuries, both of you can choose freely, to stay together or to separate, to complete the cycle or to begin a new one." The figures in the water began to merge into one another, like drops of mercury uniting. Isabel, Marianne, Dolores, and all the others converging into Zitlali, forming a single luminous entity. "They are part of you now," Mrs. Remedios told Maribel. "Their experiences, their memories, their feelings. They don't control your destiny, but they enrich your soul." Maribel felt a surge of emotions and memories that were not hers but which, in some way, belonged to her. Isabel's first encounter with Julian, Marianne's laughter echoing through the hacienda corridors, Dolores contemplating the sunset from the balcony, and further back in time, Zitlali performing rituals by the cenote, studying the stars, loving a forbidden man. "What should I do?" Maribel asked, overwhelmed by the intensity of the sensations. "Whatever you choose," the luminous figure that had been Zitlali replied. "That is the true freedom we sought." The light in the cenote began to intensify, bathing the scene in a supernatural glow. The magnolias around shed their petals, which danced in the air like snowflakes in an inverse storm. Julian took a step towards Maribel, extending his hand towards her without touching her. "I have waited centuries for this moment, for the opportunity to correct my mistake, to prove that my love is stronger than my fear." His eyes shone with an almost feverish intensity. "Come with me, Maribel. Let's complete what we started so long ago." "You don't have to go anywhere," Detective Ramsey interjected, stepping forward. "This has gone too far. Whatever is happening here, you are still a free citizen with the right to leave whenever you want." "I'm not sure free is the right word," Maribel murmured, feeling the memories of the other women pulsing within her. Each with her own voice, her own experience with the man standing before her. She turned to Mrs. Remedios. "What will happen if I complete the ritual with him?" The old woman looked at her gravely. "No one can know for sure. The original ritual twisted, and its effects have reverberated through time. Perhaps you will find peace together. Perhaps you will begin a new cycle of bondage. And if I don't, if I leave now, pues in diesen, then the cycle will break in another way. He will have to face his existence without the hope of your return, and you will have to live with the memories of lives that are not yours, but which are now a part of you." Maribel closed her eyes, trying to find clarity in the whirlwind of emotions and memories. She could feel the love Zitlali had felt for Alistair, the passion that had united Isabel and Julian, the fear and hope she had shared with Marianne. But she also felt something else, her own identity, her own self, struggling to maintain its integrity against the onslaught of other existences. When she opened her eyes, her gaze met Julian's. She saw in him the man she had loved through the centuries, but also the one who had tried to control her destiny, who had manipulated vulnerable women to satisfy his own need for redemption. "I have loved you," she finally said, "through time in different lives with different names. Part of me will always love you." "Then come with me," he insisted, hope illuminating his face. "Let's finish what we started." "But that's precisely the problem, Julian. I am not just Zitlali. I am not Isabel or Marianne or Dolores. I am Maribel Spencer, with my own life, my own dreams, my own wounds." She took a step towards him but did not take his hand. "And you are not just Alistair. You are a man who has spent centuries trying to correct a mistake, to the point of losing sight of the true meaning of love." The light in the cenote seemed to pulsate with her words, as if the place itself responded to a long-awaited truth. "What are you saying?" Julian asked, fear beginning to show in his eyes. "That I forgive you, Julian Hillcrest, for Alistair's fear, for the manipulations of Isabel, Marianne, all of them. I forgive you because I understand that you too have been trapped, in your own way." Maribel took a breath, feeling how the words she was about to utter carried an ancestral weight, as if she were speaking not only for herself, but for all the women who had stood in her place. "But forgiving you does not mean continuing the cycle. It means freeing both of us." A profound silence followed her words. The luminous figure in the cenote seemed to expand, as if approving what she had just said. "You can't leave." Julian's voice was barely a desperate whisper. "Not after all this time, all these centuries waiting for you. You weren't waiting for me, Julian. You were waiting for the opportunity to redeem yourself." Maribel extended her hand, and for the first time touched his face, a touch as light as a feather's brush. "But redemption doesn't come from repeating the past until you get it right. It comes from accepting it and moving on." Silent tears began to fall down Julian's cheeks. They were not tears of manipulation or self-pity, but of genuine ancient pain finally released. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, his voice broken. "I've lived for this moment for so long." "Live for yourself for the first time in centuries." Maribel looked towards the luminous figure in the cenote, which nodded slightly. "True love is not possession or repetition. It is freedom and growth. Detective Ramsey, who had observed everything with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief, finally spoke. Miss Spencer, if you wish to leave, I can take you back to the city. Maribel nodded. Thank you, Detective. I think that's best. The figure of Zitlali in the water began to fade, but before doing so completely, she spoke one last time. The cycle is broken not with more bonds, but with the acceptance that love and freedom must coexist. Thank you, Maribel Spencer, for having the strength I did not. With those words, the light in the cenote began to gradually dim. The magnolia petals stopped falling. The water returned to its usual stillness, reflecting the full moon on its crystal surface. Maribel took one last look at Julian, who remained motionless, like a statue carved in pain and resignation. Goodbye, Julian. I hope you find peace. As she walked away with Detective Ramsey along the path leading to the hacienda, Maribel felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The memories of the other women remained within her, but no longer as intrusive presences, but as threads in the fabric of her own existence, enriching her without dominating her. Mrs. Remedios followed them at a distance, her stooped figure moving with unexpected grace among the trees. Detective, Maribel said as they walked, how did you know where to find me tonight? Ramsey glanced at her. I've been tracking Hillcrest for years. When I learned he had hired another woman with the same profile as the missing ones, I intensified surveillance. And about Zitlali? How did you discover that story? The Inquisition archives are digitized now. When I noticed the pattern of women disappearing every so often, all with a certain physical resemblance, I started investigating the Hillcrest family history. He paused. What I didn't expect was all this. The apparitions, the lights, the inexplicable phenomena. Do you think you can include it in your official report? Maribel asked with a sad smile. Hardly. We'll say you voluntarily resigned, and that I happened to be passing by for another investigation. Ramsey looked at her curiously. But between you and me, what do you think really just happened? Maribel reflected for a moment before answering. I believe that sometimes past and present intertwine more than we imagine, and that some loves are so intense they leave marks on the very fabric of time. She looked up at the stars. But I also believe that each life must be lived for itself, not as an echo of what came before. Upon reaching the hacienda, Solana was waiting at the door, as if she had known exactly what would happen. Without a word, she hugged Maribel. Thank you for your help and your friendship, Maribel said, returning the hug. I always knew you were different from the others, the cook replied. Stronger, more complete, as if you carried more of them within you. That's exactly what happened, isn't it? Maribel looked at Mrs. Remedios, who had just caught up with them. Each of them was a fragment, and I am the last piece of the puzzle. The old woman nodded. The cenote accumulated parts of Zitlali's soul with each failed attempt. Isabel, Marianne, Dolores, all of them contributed. And you are the result, a complete soul capable of making its own decisions. And Julian, what will happen to him? He will have to find his own way now. Without the anchor of your return, without the obsession that has defined his existence for centuries. As Maribel entered the hacienda to gather her few belongings, a question struck her. Mrs. Remedios, who are you really? How do you know so much about all of this? The old woman smiled, a gesture that transformed her wrinkled face, illuminating it with ancestral wisdom. Let's just say I've been observing this cycle for a very long time. Longer than you can imagine. Are you also trapped in some kind of time loop? Not trapped, child. Observing. There are forces in this world older than the Mayans, older than any human civilization. Some of us serve as witnesses, as guardians of the stories that repeat themselves. Maribel nodded, accepting that there are mysteries she might never fully understand. And that was okay. Life didn't need to be fully comprehended to be lived fully. As she packed her things, she found a small object on her pillow that she hadn't seen before, a perfect, freshly cut magnolia blossom. There was no note, none was needed. It was Julian's silent farewell. She carefully took it and placed it between the pages of her diary, not as a memory of past bindings, but as a testament to the extraordinary journey she had unknowingly embarked upon. When she finally left the hacienda with her suitcase, dawn was breaking on the horizon. Detective Ramsey was waiting by his car, ready to drive her back to the city. "Where will you go now?" he asked as he opened the car door for her. Maribel looked east, where the first rays of sun were beginning to gild the Emerald County mountains. "I don't know for sure, but for the first time in my life, or should I say, in my lives, I feel I have the freedom to discover it." As the car drove away along the dirt road, Maribel took one last look at the imposing pink stone hacienda. For an instant, she thought she saw Julian on the main balcony watching her leave, not with resentment or desperation, but with a melancholic acceptance that perhaps was the beginning of his own liberation. And as the distance grew, she felt the memories of Isabel, Marianne, Dolores, and the others settle deep within her being, not as intrusions, but as additional threads in the fabric of her existence, enriching her perspective without defining her destiny. The necklace had been thrown into the cenote. The cycle was broken, but something new had begun. 6 months after that night by the cenote, Maribel found herself sitting on the terrace of a small cafe in the historic center of Whitehaven. The White City, with its colonial architecture and vibrant culture, had been the perfect refuge for rebuilding her life. In front of her on the wrought iron table rested a notebook filled with tight script and meticulous drawings, fragments of memories that were not hers, but now formed part of her existence. Each morning, upon waking, new details emerged. A song Dolores used to hum while embroidering, the scent of the perfume Isabel applied to her wrists, the way Marianne laughed, throwing her head back. And further back in time, ancient rituals Zitlali performed under the crescent moon. At first, these memories had overwhelmed her. There were nights when she woke up screaming, confused about who she really was. But over time, and with the unexpected help of Mrs. Remedios, who had mysteriously appeared in Whitehaven a few weeks after her arrival, Maribel had learned to integrate those memories without losing her own identity. "More coffee, miss?" the waiter asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, thank you," Maribel replied with a smile. As she watched the central square, where tourists and locals mingled in a daily urban ballet, she reflected on the twists her life had taken. After leaving Hillcrest Hacienda, Detective Ramsey had helped her settle temporarily in Capital City. There, using his contacts, he had arranged for Maribel to get a job as a translator at an anthropology museum. Her inexplicable knowledge of ancient Mayan dialects, Zitlali's legacy, had proven to be a valuable talent. In a few months, she had earned a reputation as an intuitive expert in pre-Columbian texts, capable of detecting nuances and meanings that eluded academics with decades of formal study. That work had eventually led her to Whitehaven, where the prestigious Center for Mayan Studies had offered her a position as a specialized consultant. The irony was not lost on her. The very knowledge that was part of an ancestral curse now provided her with a stable and fulfilling life. "You look well, child," a familiar voice said behind her. Maribel turned to find Mrs. Remedios, who, despite her advanced age, moved with the agility of someone decades younger. The old woman took a seat opposite her without waiting for an invitation. "The memories have settled," Maribel replied. "They no longer wake me at night." "That's because you've learned to integrate them, not to fight against them." Mrs. Remedios observed the notebook on the table. "You're doing exactly the right thing, documenting, processing, accepting." "There's something I never asked you," Maribel said, lowering her voice. "Why did the cenote choose me? Why was I the one who received all these memories, the one who completed the cycle?" The old woman smiled enigmatically. "The cenote didn't choose you, Maribel. You chose yourself. I don't understand." Each of them, Isabel, Marianne, Dolores, those who came before, all had the opportunity to break the cycle. But fear or love or some combination of both led them to repeat the pattern. Mrs. Remedios took a sip of the coffee the waiter had just served her. "You were the first who chose freedom over obsessive love, who understood that forgiveness does not mean repetition." "And what will happen now? Is the cycle truly broken? That depends on you and to some extent on Julian." The name sent a shiver down Maribel's spine. Despite the months that had passed, despite the distance and her new life, a part of her still responded to that name like a guitar string being plucked. "Have you heard anything from him?" she asked, trying to make her voice sound casual. "He's still at the hacienda, but he's changed. The distillery is back to full capacity. He's opened the house doors for guided tours on the history of Hillcrest tequila." Mrs. Remedios observed her attentively. "And he stopped looking for ghosts in every woman he meets." Maribel nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and something she didn't want to name as disappointment. "It's better this way," she finally said. "We both needed to break free from the past." "Breaking free from the past doesn't mean denying it, child. It means integrating it into who we are now." Those words resonated with Maribel for the rest of the day as she continued with her usual activities: a meeting at the Center for Mayan Studies, a glyph interpretation class she taught to university students, a walk in the park at sunset. That night, in the solitude of her small apartment in the Santiago quarter, Maribel dreamed again of the cenote. But this time the dream was different. There was no anguish, no pursuit, just crystal-clear water reflecting a starry sky, and a feeling of profound peace. Upon waking, she knew what she had to do. 2 weeks later, Maribel parked a rental car in front of the imposing wrought-iron gates of Hillcrest Hacienda. Unlike her first arrival, this time the gates were wide open, and an elegant sign announced, "Welcome to Hillcrest Hacienda, guided tours and premium tequila tastings." The jacaranda-lined path leading to the main house was impeccably maintained, and several groups of tourists wandered through the gardens, listening to guides explain the property's centuries-old history. Maribel remained in the car for a moment, gathering courage. She hadn't announced her visit. She wasn't sure what to expect, or even why exactly she had returned. She only knew that she needed to close this chapter properly, face to face, without supernatural apparitions or glowing cenotes. As she got out of the vehicle, a familiar figure approached, Mr. Ansell, the old gardener, whose face lit up in recognition. "Miss Maribel," he said with a wide smile. "What a joy to see you again." "Mr. Ansell," she replied, genuinely happy to see the old man. "I see things have changed around here. For the better, I'd say. The hacienda has come back to life." The gardener looked towards the main house. "The master has changed too. He's more present, as if he's returned from a long journey." "Is he here today?" "In the conservatory, overseeing the new blue agave crops. We're experimenting with ancient varieties, recovered from Mayan texts," he explained proudly. "It was his idea, inspired by—" He stopped, suddenly uncomfortable. "Inspired by me," Maribel completed. "By what he learned from you," Mr. Ansell nodded. "He said that if he couldn't recover the past, he could at least honor it by creating something new from the old." Maribel felt an unexpected warmth at these words. She followed the gardener through the hacienda grounds. Noticing the changes, the agave fields were more extensive and better cared for. There were new buildings housing the modernized distillery, and the overall atmosphere was one of vitality and purpose, so different from the oppressive melancholy that had permeated the place when she first arrived. The conservatory was an elegant iron and glass structure, built in Victorian style, but with clear Mayan design influences in its decorative details. Upon entering, Maribel was greeted by a humid warmth and the intense aroma of fertile earth and lush plants. And there, leaning over a workbench, meticulously examining small agave seedlings, was Julian Hillcrest. He had changed. His posture was more relaxed, his face less tense. He had grown a short beard that gave him a more approachable, less severe look. When he looked up and saw her, his expression shifted from surprise to astonishment, and finally to a cautious smile. "Maribel," he said simply, as if he had been waiting to utter her name for months. "Hello." "Julian," she replied, surprised by the natural flow of the conversation, as if 6 months hadn't passed, as if they hadn't parted after a supernatural revelation by a mystical cenote. "You've come back," he added, taking off his gardening gloves. "Just visiting," Maribel clarified. "I'm working in Whitehaven at the Center for Mayan Studies." "Of course." Julian nodded, his smile now tinged with a slight sadness. "It makes sense. Your knowledge is extraordinary." A silence settled between them, not entirely awkward, but laden with unasked questions and contained emotions. "The hacienda looks different," Maribel finally commented, looking around. "More alive." "It is. I decided it was time to look forward, not back." Julian gestured, encompassing the conservatory. "This project is recovering agave varieties that the ancient Mayans cultivated for rituals. We combine traditional techniques with modern science." A pause. I would have loved to have your expertise. It's not really my expertise, she gently reminded him. It's Zitlali's memories. Are they still there? The memories of all of them? Maribel nodded. Yes, but now they're like books on a shelf. I can open them when I want, but they don't define me. She took a few steps through the conservatory, observing the different agave varieties. And you? Do you still feel the connection? I always will, he replied honestly. But it no longer consumes me. I understood what you tried to teach me that night, that true love liberates. It doesn't imprison. Their gazes met, and for an instant, Maribel felt the echo of all the women who had loved this man through the centuries. But this time the sensation didn't overwhelm her. It was simply a context, a backdrop for her own feelings, which were as complex and contradictory as any genuine human emotion. I have something for you, Julian said, walking towards a small desk in a corner of the conservatory. From a drawer he extracted a carved wooden box with Mayan motifs. When he opened it, Maribel saw a set of carefully labeled seeds. They're from the magnolias that grow near the cenote, he explained. I thought you might want to plant them where you live now. A memory, but one that can grow and transform into something new. The gesture was so unexpected, so perfect in its symbolism, that Maribel felt tears forming in her eyes. They were not tears of sadness or nostalgia, but of recognition, of appreciation for the way both of them were trying to honor the past without being trapped in it. Thank you, she said, taking the box. It's a perfect gift. Will you stay for dinner? Julian asked. Solana would be delighted to see you. She never stops talking about how much she misses having someone who truly appreciates her Riverbend Valley mole. Maribel smiled, remembering the meals shared in the hacienda kitchen, the stories exchanged, the warmth of Solana's friendship. I'd love to. As they walked together towards the main house, they maintained a respectful distance between them. It wasn't the distance of fear or mistrust, but that of mutual respect, of the recognition that any new connection between them would have to be built on different foundations. The sun was beginning to set over the agave fields, bathing the hacienda in a golden light that softened its stone contours. In the distance, the cenote gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the sunset sky. But it no longer seemed a mysterious portal or a threat, but simply a beautiful part of the natural landscape. Do you know what's strangest? Maribel commented as they walked. For the first time in my memory, or I should say in my lives, I feel completely present in my own life. I'm not running from anything, nor searching for something indefinable. The freedom to simply be who you are, Julian nodded. It's a gift you gave both of us that night. As they entered the hacienda, where the aromas of Solana's cooking already wafted through the air, Maribel reflected on the strange paths she had traveled to reach this moment, on how sometimes the end of an ancestral story could be the beginning of something entirely new, and on how, perhaps the deepest love was not that which bound two souls eternally, but that which gave them the strength to free each other. Dinner at Hillcrest Hacienda was a surprisingly warm and natural experience. Solana had cried with joy at seeing Maribel, hugging her with the strength of someone recovering a lost daughter. The cook had prepared all of Maribel's favorite dishes, including a Riverbend Valley mole that rivaled the best. Conversation flowed easily, focusing mainly on the present. Maribel's projects at the Center for Mayan Studies, the revitalization of the hacienda and distillery under Julian's new direction, Solana's anecdotes about the foreign tourists who now visited the property, the past, the broken cycle, the supernatural apparitions, all that floated beneath the surface, but did not dominate the encounter. It was like a tacit agreement to value this new beginning without denying what had happened. And you should see the faces of the Japanese tourists when they taste the aged tequila for the first time, Solana laughed, serving more rice. They look like they've seen a ghost. The irony of the expression was not lost, and the three exchanged knowing glances before bursting into liberating laughter. After dinner, Julian suggested a stroll through the illuminated gardens. The night was perfect, clear sky, pleasant temperature, and the scent of jasmine and magnolias floating in the air. I never asked you what happened after I left, Maribel commented as they walked along a torch-lined path. With Detective Ramsey with the investigation? Officially, the case of the missing women remains open, Julian replied. But Ramsey seems to have lost interest in pursuing me. I think what he saw that night challenged his rational view of the world too much. Have you spoken since then? Surprisingly, yes. He comes every few months, supposedly to check leads, but in reality I think he's fascinated with the hacienda's history. He's even helped document some of the archaeological finds on the property. Julian smiled slightly. Last time he brought a historian from the National Institute of Anthropology. They're cataloguing the Mayan petroglyphs near the cenote. They stopped at an overlook that offered a panoramic view of the agave fields, silvery under the moonlight. And you, Julian continued, have you found what you were looking for in Whitehaven? Maribel reflected before answering. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Perhaps just a place where I could be myself, where the memories of the others were a strength, not a burden. She paused. And yes, I think I've found it. I'm glad to hear that, he said, and the sincerity in his voice was palpable. They looked at each other in silence for a moment, both aware of the strange intimacy they shared, a connection forged across centuries, of intertwined lives, of repeated loves and losses in a cycle they had finally had the courage to break. Do you know what I've been thinking? Maribel finally said. Perhaps the purpose of this whole cycle wasn't to eternally unite two souls, but to teach us both a lesson about true love. What lesson would that be? Firstly, that to truly love means to allow the other to be free. That love is not possession, not even eternal constancy, but mutual growth. Maribel looked towards the cenote, barely visible as a silver glimmer in the distance. Zitlali and Alistair didn't understand that. Neither did we for a long time. But now we do, Julian affirmed. Now we do, she confirmed. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding. It was not an end to something, but perhaps the beginning of something new, something not determined by ancestral forces, but by conscious choices. How long will you stay in the region? Julian asked eventually. A few days. There's a conference on Mayan epigraphy in Uxmal that I need to attend. You could stay here if you like. The hacienda has plenty of spare rooms, and Solana would be delighted. Maribel considered the offer. 6 months ago, the idea of staying under the same roof as Julian would have seemed dangerous, laden with ancestral meanings and potential karmic traps. Now, however, it was simply a practical invitation from a friend. I'd love to, she finally replied, though I'll have to return to Whitehaven on Friday. Of course, Julian smiled. No expectations, no pressure. Just the opportunity to get to know each other as we are now, not as we were. That night, as she settled into a different room than the one she had occupied during her time as an employee, a thoughtful detail on Julian's part, Maribel reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She had arrived at Hillcrest Hacienda, fleeing a past that haunted her, only to discover that she carried within her fragments of multiple pasts that were not her own. And now she returned, not as a fugitive nor as a reincarnation, but as a complete woman, mistress of her own story. In the following days, they established a comfortable routine. Maribel spent her mornings working on her translations for the conference, using Julian's study with its privileged view of the agave fields. In the afternoons, they sometimes explored the hacienda grounds together, with Julian showing her the changes and improvements, or visited nearby towns so Maribel could experience the region as a tourist, not as someone trapped in a supernatural story. Evenings were for long, relaxed conversations on the terrace, sometimes accompanied by Solana, other times just the two of them, sharing experiences, ideas, dreams for the future. They spoke as friends, as equals, without the unbalanced dynamic of employer-employee or the tension of fated lovers. And if sometimes their glances lingered for a second longer than necessary, if their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same object, if they felt that flicker of something deeper than friendship, they let it be, neither forcing it nor repressing it. Whatever was to develop between them would be something new, something chosen, not imposed by ghosts of the past. The eve of her departure, Julian took her to a place they hadn't visited together since that fateful night, the cenote. In the twilight, the place was incredibly beautiful. Magnolias bloomed around it, but they no longer seemed a supernatural omen, but simply exquisite flowers in their natural habitat. The crystal water reflected the sky, which changed from blue to orange and purple as the sun descended. The first time I saw this cenote, I felt afraid, Maribel confessed, as if I instinctively knew it held dangerous secrets. And now? Julian asked. Now I just see a beautiful sea note, she replied with a smile. The water is just water. The history it carried has ended. They sat on a stone bench Julian had recently installed, part of the improvements for the tourist tours. The tour guides tell the legend of the cenote, you know? He commented. A very watered-down version, of course, about two lovers from different worlds who promise to reunite across time. And what do the tourists say? Soon they love it. They find it romantic, Julian smiled ironically. If they only knew the truth. Perhaps the romantic version also has its truth, Maribel reflected. After all, Citlali and Alistair genuinely loved each other. They just didn't understand that true love doesn't need supernatural pacts. As dusk deepened, a gentle breeze stirred the magnolia blossoms, causing some petals to fall and dance on the water's surface. There's something I've wanted to ask you, Julian said, his voice deeper. That day when you threw the necklace into the cenote, did you feel anything? Any change within you? Maribel considered the question. It was as if something unraveled, like when you untie a very tight knot and feel that sudden release. She paused, searching for the right words. It wasn't so much that the other women disappeared from me, but that they found their rightful place, as if before they were all mixed up, fighting for control, and afterwards each settled into her own space within me. And Citlali, she's there, of course. Her knowledge, her passion, her strength. But she's no longer a separate entity trying to take control. She's simply a part of the woman I've become. Julian nodded as if her answer confirmed something he already suspected. Sometimes I think we all carry fragments of other lives within us, not necessarily through reincarnation or magic, but through the stories we've been told, the people we've loved, the places that have marked us. A more prosaic version of what happened to us. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's the same, only most people don't experience it as dramatically as we do. They laughed together, and in that shared laughter there was so much. Acceptance of the past, appreciation of the present, openness to the future. When they finally returned to the hacienda, night had fully fallen. The stars shone with extraordinary clarity in the Emerald County sky, and the crescent moon, not entirely unlike the amulet that had unleashed everything, cast its silvery light over the fields. The next morning, as Maribel finished packing her belongings, she noticed something on the nightstand she hadn't seen before, a small leather-bound book with no title on the spine. Opening it, she discovered it was a diary, with Julian's elegant handwriting covering the first page. For new memories, freely chosen. For a story that begins now, not centuries ago. The gesture deeply moved her. It was not an attempt to recreate the past, but an invitation to write something completely new. When she went down to the main courtyard, where Julian was waiting to take her to the bus station, Maribel carried the diary in her bag, along with the box of magnolia seeds he had given her days earlier. "I'll let you know when I arrive in Whitehaven," she said, as he placed her suitcase in the car's trunk. "I'll be waiting for your call," Julian replied. Then he added with a smile, with no supernatural implications in that phrase. "I appreciate the clarification," Maribel laughed. The journey to the station passed in comfortable silence. There was no need for grand goodbyes or promises. Both knew that this was not an end, but a chapter closing so another could begin. Before she boarded the bus, Julian briefly took her hand. A simple, human, chosen touch. "Thank you," he said simply, "for teaching me that some things must end for others to begin." "Thank you," she responded, "for finally letting me go so I could choose to return." And with that they parted ways. Without drama, without eternal promises, without ancestral rituals, just two people who had traveled through time and pain to finally meet as equals, free from the chains of the past. As the bus pulled away down the road, Maribel looked out the window at the agave fields stretching to the horizon. Somewhere among those thorny, proud plants was the cenote, its crystal water now free of ghosts. She opened the diary Julian had given her, and on the first page wrote, "Today my story begins. Not Isabel's, nor Marianne's, nor Dolores's, nor even Citlali's, my own. With borrowed memories that enrich my soul, but do not define my path." 3 months later, a small magnolia bloomed in a pot on her apartment balcony in Whitehaven. It had grown from the seeds Julian had given her, a perfect symbol of how something from the past could nourish the present without dominating it. Julian visited Whitehaven regularly to attend conferences on sustainable agriculture or to meet with distributors of his premium tequila each time they saw each other, sometimes for a quick coffee between commitments, other times for long dinners where they talked for hours. Occasionally, Maribel returned to the hacienda, now as a guest, never as an employee or prisoner of fate. What grew between them was slow, cautious, built on conscious choices, and not on ancestral curses or inevitable destinies. They didn't know exactly where it would lead them, and that was okay. Uncertainty was part of the freedom they had so hard won. One afternoon, as they shared a sunset on Progreso Beach, with the sun sinking into the turquoise waters of the Gulf of Mexico, Maribel reflected aloud. "Do you know what's the most valuable thing I learned from all this? That our past can inform who we are, but it should never dictate who we can become." Julian took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "And that sometimes we must lose something to find it again in the right way." Their gazes met, free of ghosts, of supernatural expectations, of predetermined cycles. Just two people, choosing each day to build something new together. The waters of the Gulf sparkled with the last rays of the sun, vaguely reminding them of the cenote that had witnessed their ancestral story. But now it was just water, beautiful in its simplicity.